Hey everybody, Neon here. Today's game is going to be Savjz against Dantics. So this is another one of the matches that was in the BTS tournament that happened this weekend, and I wanted to go through their first game and talk about some of the strategy that's going on here. Before we get into that, though, of course, just want to let you know about Ink Gaming. They have all sorts of wonderful gaming supplies and merchandise. Check them out if you haven't had a chance yet. Also, of course, this footage is coming from the BTS tournament that happened. There'll be a link below for where you can get that footage because they obviously did such a spectacular job. But with that, I am going to get right into the game. So, as always, I'm looking to try and get better at doing this casting business, so going to be going through it and trying my best to cast this like a professional, so I'm really looking for any feedback that you can give me and looking to improve. Not a whole lot is going on here, though. Of course, like, you have red heroes and blue spells, so there really can't be very much done. Luna here, though, can cast Better Late Than Never, which is a 3-cost blue spell that is a cross-lane spell, actually, and deploys a melee creep in one of the lanes. So she decides to place it into that center lane, which it's an interesting decision because you actually know that it's going to be landing in that exact position there. But if you look at the layout of the lanes, you can't really see it now, obviously, but the center lane was the one that, like, you're winning the first lane pretty well. The center lane, you're not winning, so you kind of want to add a little bit more pressure there if you can, to see if you can take over all three. And then landing into that third lane is probably not going to do a whole lot, so pressuring that Legion Commander seems interesting. Now, placing this hero and this deployment phase is actually an interesting decision. Opts for the left lane, and I think that the reason why is, of course, try to balance out the pressure and balance out the impact that's happening there. On the other side of the board, we have the Magnus that goes into the rightmost lane. I think that that's probably a mistake, and I'll kind of describe a little bit as to why later on. Okay, so right now we have the opponent, Dantics, is drawing 2 cards with Foresight. We have the opportunity to open up a dimensional portal to get a whole squad of creeps out here, which is looking pretty good. So this lane is obviously going spectacularly. This middle lane is a little bit harder to read, though. The fact that Savjz doesn't have any red spells in hand is definitely a hindrance. Getting hit by that nasal goo doesn't feel good either. It's particularly bad against Legion Commander because Legion Commander, with that Retaliate ability, you get double procs of the negative armor effects, so that's actually going to be an interesting one that kind of comes up over the course of the game. We have another negative armor here on the Luna. She's already pretty squishy, though, so it's not a huge impact there, just spending it because you have the money to do so. Buying a Stonehull Cloak because you have the money to do so. This isn't an econ deck, so usually it's just right to just spend your money when you ever have the chance. There's no big items here that we know of. Unfortunately, in the course of this video, they don't show it of what the whole composition of the deck is. Now, this is a decision that I think is quite interesting about where the Tidehunter ends up going, whether they're going to the left, middle, or right lane. He ends up opting for the center lane, which I think is a mistake. This will be one of the points that I draw into and talk about when we actually get into the more analysis side of the conversation after the cast, but goes for the center lane here, and which I don't really understand what the point is there, given the fact that they already have a red hero in the lane and you don't have one on the right-hand side. Now, we did get a red card, finally. It's not a great one, though. I don't think that Rend Armor is the kind of card that you're ever happy to have in your deck as a red player. I mean, in this case, it's worth noting that there's a combo with the Centaur Warrunner, because his signature card gives negative armor until end of turn and positive attack, and then Rend Armor works to reverse that so that you get 0 armor until end of turn, and then you get the positive armor afterwards. So it's a really brutal combo if you can actually assemble it. Now, he does a Compel here. It's a slightly better board play because it allows you to take out that creep, but really that's more for the purposes of just cycling cards and trying to find more red spells, because there's clearly a problem going on right now given the composition of the hand. So I like that play, though, for it. Now, we get the Aghanim Sanctum on the other side that I think is it's an interesting decision to bring up, and that is another one that I think is worth talking about. This sequence of plays is particularly fascinating. So we have the opportunity to Rend Armor right now with the Centaur Warrunner, as I mentioned before, was hit with that negative armor earlier in the turn as a result of the nasal goo. So here we have the opportunity to reverse that and bring him back up to 0 armor, which is nice. He's debating what to do though, and kind of considering things. Ended up going for the negative armor on their opponent though, which I think is actually kind of fascinating. I don't fully appreciate why that decision was made here, given the fact that, I mean, maybe you just didn't see the play, but I feel like getting your own hero +2 armor is, when they're at -2, is a lot better than getting your opponent down from 1 to 0, so I'm not sure. Dantics, though, commits a bunch into this play, trying to kill the Centaur Warrunner. I don't understand why they're doing this. This isn't a play that I'm going to get into. I just kind of think that this was a mistake. They were committing a bunch of stuff of like activation and redirecting things and getting him to attack her so that they could trade, and then temporal scrolls for out, which is just like this bizarre sequence that I don't understand why it was so important. Now, nothing really happens in that rightmost lane, and we move back to the shopping phase. We have clearly a problem of blue spells overwhelming our hand here on Savjz's side, on both sides, honestly. But on the other side, at least, we have a lot of the Thunder God's Wrath, which, I mean, we have Eclipse on this side, too. So there's just a lot going on. Lots of power on both sides, and they're just trying to get to that 7-mana turn, I think. The Call of Reserves in this position, though, this is why the cross-lane spells are so good. You've clearly won this lane. Like, your opponent's abandoned it, you're winning it, and that's a really good thing. And you now have the possibility to launch these little duders into the more right lanes from this lane. Especially this is so good in the first lane too, because these guys, these creeps, are going to be affecting these lanes as you go further down. And so he's just so much less punished than having his heroes stranded in the first lane. I think that if this was a normal game and he didn't have these cross lane spells, that would have been a real problem. But he's able to do this. The Omexa Arena does come down from Dantics' side into the 3rd lane, which is a nice little addition. Going to get further usage out of that mana as a result of the Aghanim's Sanctum. The Messenger Rookery is also available there. All of these little plays are kind of, nice and cute and stuff, and they're doing good work, but it's not really any of it is really hugely impactful. When I was initially looking through this, I was kind of wondering whether it was worth the initiative to do all of this business, since none of these individual plays were really particularly proactive, but I kind of just like the idea of getting these cards out of your hand, so it's fine, even though it costs you initiative. There's actually this like concept I think of called like an initiative hole, where you are already... Okay, so Thunderstorm there, by the way. That was a pretty big setup. And this is part of the reason I was talking about this initiative thing of, like, maybe it would have been worth passing it, because he has so many, bangers, 6-cost spells in the deck for Savjz, so I kind of would want to have initiative going into that last lane. But I like the idea sometimes of just kind of getting yourself into what I would call an initiative hole, where you're just spending a bunch of cards. Like, you just do a bunch of stuff because you're just like, I have already given up an initiative that doesn't cost anything anymore, so I'm just going to drop a bunch of cards in my hand because they don't cost initiative anymore, which is an important concept, I think, in understanding initiative in the course of the games. Okay, so round 5 here, we draw a couple more cards. We still have a copy of Call of Reserves. This actually sets up a really nice play on Savjz's side. He's able to play first the Call of Reserves and then the Kraken Shell in order to both deploy and develop the board in these other lanes, and then also just recapture initiative so it doesn't cost anything. That Kraken Shell, like, when I've watched it in the course of some of these games, is so good. I actually had been initially thinking about, like, I wonder how important initiative is in draft, and I think that it's really a big deal. Even in draft, like, I mean, usually you think of draft type formats as being more about maintaining value, but it's been quite good here. So taking down that tower, very good progress in this game. We have a lot of possibilities here. Decides to go for the Ravage. We actually don't have a ton of possibilities here. It's the other red spell in hand is the piercing one, gets all your spot weakness rather. is the name of it. So we do get a Ravage on that Jamoy, which stops him from casting the Thunder God's Wrath. I think that was the particular plan that he was trying to set up, is just say, I want to disrupt that card because there is some targets that are soft to it here. So I definitely appreciate that. Now setting up the Kraken, the Beastmaster's Call there. The Savage Roar, that's the name of it, right? Yeah, close enough. The Magic and Maul taking down the Messenger Rookery, all of that business, just, you know, chopping things up. It's also particularly good that he did that initiative play when on that lane, because there's the Aghanim Sanctum there as well, so that it can't do, like, for instance, Thunder God's Wrath into Thunder God's Wrath, which is what you have in hand. So just that Kraken Shell in that first lane of this turn, like, kind of one Savjz the game in this weird way, and it seems really, really important to me that that's how things ended up working out. Now finally he's losing that third lane, but really has slowed down the progress there. It's been a particularly lackluster game for Dantics. I mean, part of this has to do with drawing all of the Thunder God's Wrath in the early game, which understandably is going to slow you down. But yeah, that third lane has not been going particularly fast. It's what you need in this situation, because you really need to threaten an Ancient kill here, I think, in order to actually make your opponent respond, since they can very clearly outrace you in that center and left lane for just tower kills. Now in this position, the hand of Savjz is kind of weird, because you have these really, really powerful spells that just don't do a whole ton. Given the fact that your blue heroes are a little bit stranded, you have the one that's in the left lane that has been here for a really long time. Done a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but he is not accomplishing anything any longer. So he ends up having to cycle the spot weakness, which I think is correct to do in this situation, and then you can play for initiative again with that Kraken Shell, because getting your hands on that Primal Roar is obviously going to be a great advantage going into that second lane of being able to knock that Jamoy out, which will help, will stop him from doing anything here and help you just further control that center lane. So yeah, get the Kraken Shell out here. Attack down. 7 damage on that Ancient. Very nice stuff. Move it into the center lane. Get that Primal Roar. Knock Jamoy into the left lane, which is the best possible lane for you, given the situation. Now, the Bristleback has to play out some of those Hellbear Cripplers in order to slow down the offensive, but clearly in this position, we have a massive advantage on the side of Savjz. It doesn't really have a whole lot of options here. Just, I guess, thinking about dueling some creeps down. If it's possible to just do that, I think that you kind of have to, honestly, spend one of those duels in hand, since they're not doing anything else, right? Like, so do that on one of the creeps as well after deploying all of this. You also still have the Aghanim Sanctum that you can access, and that'll help you as well to play out all these cards if you get into that position. But I don't think that you will, given how much you have to do. First Crippler down. Second one will come down eventually. It's hard to know why it's taking so long with these plays. I don't know what he's expecting to come out from the opponent here, since Savjz is clearly just, you know, auto-passing all of these times. So second Crippler. Hellbear comes out. I mean, maybe, I guess, deciding what you can do with the duels, whether you have to be playing the Cripplers. You just have to be playing the Cripplers here, though, because they are what's keeping you alive in the situation. Sword of the Vigil, knocking things down. Now we move into the third lane, in which case we still have access to the Thunder God's Wrath, which is kind of interesting for killing some of the stuff that's in the first lane, but instead just going to be opting for that tower kill, which is obviously pretty exciting as well. But given the fact that that center lane is basically guaranteed to be lost, this really isn't accomplishing a whole ton. So Savjz just passes, we get an attack in here. Savjz knows that with those two heroes coming in, especially into that center lane, it's going to be virtually impossible for the opponent to keep his tower alive. I mean, maybe if he saw that there was an annihilation in the deck, that there's something that you could respect, but we can't take a look at the deck right now, and I would kind of assume that there isn't there, given how much Savjz is not respecting it. Again, go to that first lane and draw some cards, which are incredibly meaningful. Right now, all these blue cards that he can't really do very much with. Just going to pass from Savjz's side. It's also just correct in these sorts of positions to just pass, and force your opponent to do something. Yeah, they get the cards right. That actually probably helps you, since now if there was a way for your opponents to fight back in the central lane, you have a better chance of deploying in there, which is nice. But I mean, as I said, and it's perfectly clear probably to all of you, none of this matters. We move into the center lane. We are actually able to then friendly fire these two red heroes against one another. They both die, locking the opponent out of any sorts of plays, and that will lead to a kill on this tower, which finishes the game. So with that, let's move on to do some analysis, shall we? So in today's video, I wanted to talk a bit about macro decision-making. This is the idea of decision-making that relates to the global picture of what's happening in the game and your strategy for winning, what you're prioritizing, lanes that you're choosing to fight for, and why. That's the idea of macro, while micro is about sequencing and making sure that you're targeting things, the correct targets for the various spells that you're using, etc. So macro decision making is one of the biggest decision points that comes early on in the game, is where you're placing your initial heroes. And we can do an analysis here of why Savjz and Dantics should place the heroes where they should. In this case, Savjz, he actually doesn't place in the Ogre into the center lane, pulls it into the left lane. The right lane, obviously, you're not going to place it there. There's a Luna there already. It's repetitive to have two blue heroes into the same lane. You pretty much guaranteed just don't want it there. And it's also a lane that doesn't seem to be going great, has a pretty good chance of showing up in front of the Bristleback and just feeding. So not where you want to be. The leftmost lane, if you place it there, you can try and take over that lane. You have a good chance of being able to just push your opponent out of that lane entirely. So that's pretty appealing. The center lane, if you place him there, you already have two creeps that are going in there already, so you're pretty much obviously going to be dominating here if you have that, and it might be better to play for the left lane more, or maybe you're reading the fact that there's a higher chance that the Magnus goes into the leftmost lane and trying to counter that somehow. It's hard to tell. I think that another consideration might be about Ogre being particularly good at being a first lane hero that you've taken over and you're launching these cross lane spells, which Savjz actually has a decent number of. So that might be part of it too. I think the center lane and the left lane are kind of close. Personally, like the left lane a little bit more, which is what he ends up going towards. Dantics, on the other hand, is trying to decide where to put the Magnus. He opts for the right lane, which I think is just wrong. And here's some of my reasons as to why. You're ahead in this lane, given the current composition, and given the fact that you also have some creeps that are going into the lane. There's a really low chance of Magnus making a difference and actually killing Luna. I mean, maybe you can empower a creep that if you draw that card and kill her, that seems like a bit of a bank shot. We don't know what else is in the deck, so it's hard to say for sure whether this is... If I don't mistake, there might have been some other specific card that works well in the situation that we're not thinking of, but it just feels like there's nothing in the hand right now that makes sense to include this, to put the Magnus here. So, really committing a bunch of extra resources, a whole hero, into a lane that you're already winning, and that doesn't seem to have, I don't know. I don't understand what's going on here of why you're doing that. In the left lane or in the center lane, he actually makes a pretty big difference there, though. In the center lane, he's a good chance of showing up in front of the center War Runner, and maybe you can set up a kill there somehow. For instance, you're playing Vicious Nasal Goo in your deck, and if you give negative armor to the center War Runner, that's pretty cool. So that's something that I'm interested in. Obviously, it's on a great combat combo. I guess he's the best thing that you have to be battling the the Centaur Warrunner as well, given the fact that he has at least that one armor and it helps mitigate that attack from the retaliate. The leftmost lane, he has a pretty good chance of showing up right in front of that Hellbear Crippler, assuming that the Ogre shows up in the center lane, like that's just 100% there, and then the 50% chance if the Ogre shows up there. Obviously, you're not excited about getting -1 attack on your hero, but you kill a creep basically for free, so that's pretty cool. And then also you have the possibility of doing things like empowering your Zeus to maybe try and set up a kill on that Beastmaster or a couple of turns, or if you have any other protection effects that might be available. Or you can ventriloquy him in order to redirect the attack of the Beastmaster to keep that Zeus alive for a little bit longer. So ultimately, I'm personally not certain about where the Magnus is supposed to go, other than it's not the right lane where he ends up actually going, unfortunately. So let's move on to the deployment phase for round 3. So the first point I actually want to make here is about the importance of macro decision making, because if you actually look at the board from this position, it's roughly what we would have expected given our characterization of the decisions that were made last deployment phase. All of the micro decisions that happened in between there were kind of just a natural outcome of the macro forces. So from here though, so Savjz definitely in control of the left lane. The center lane is the one that's kind of contested. All of those, Savjz is the head. And then the rightmost lane, Dantics is ahead, but kind of only very slowly mounting an offensive there. So given this situation, I think that's pretty obvious where Dantics is supposed to be playing Jamoy, and that's the center lane. The left lane, he's just going to feed if he shows up there, most likely. And then in the right lane, he's just winning more, doesn't actually accomplish very much, especially since there's not very many cross-lane spells that are available at this point in the game, and those cross-lane spells are better played even from the left lane as well. So center lane is where Jamoy goes. Question now becomes where Tidehunter goes. Obviously not the left lane, because you're already way ahead there, and you already have a red hero there. The question is between the center and the right lane. I actually prefer the right lane here, and here's why. Tidehunter is good at 3 things, I would say. He is good at slowing the game down in a given lane, because he is a big damage soak. He is good at ravaging, like he has a great ability, and which is good in a crowded lane, and he's good at casting red spells for you. In the center lane, like it is not a crowded lane, so even though you don't have the ravages available right now, he's like, even if you did have the ravage available, this isn't where you would want to be playing. This isn't where you would prefer to be playing it. So you would prefer to be playing in the right lane, especially given the fact that he has a good chance of living for a couple of turns so that he can actually deploy a Ravage eventually. So that's one that is preferable to have him in the right lane for. You also want to slow the game down in the right-hand lane because you're losing there. Like Tidehunter is a good hero to send into a losing lane and just be like, okay, buddy, just buy us a couple turns. Just, you know, between the Ravage and then your ton of health, just soak up a ton of damage. Let us win lane 1 and 2, you can take it. Like, he is good. He's a tank. He can go and do that in lane 3. So that is another advantage of putting him into the third lane. And finally, he helps you cast red spells, and you can already do that in the center lane. So I don't really understand what he's trying to accomplish by moving him into the center lane, especially given the fact that like he's not going to be setting up a kill particularly effectively on anything because he doesn't attack well. Just like Center Warrunner is going to be better at that, so I'm not sure. I don't like this move personally. I'm interested just to hear if you had any thoughts as to where he should have gone or like why maybe the center lane would have been better, because I can't think of anything. So for the final thing I want to talk about is actually a really subtle mistake that is once again at the macro level, and that's buying this healing salve right now from Savjz's side. And the reason why you'll see is like, we'll kind of like play through the tape a little bit, but as we get to the left lane, you'll see that both the Beastmaster and the Ogre Magi are on low health, and you kind of say, it's like, well, it's nice to heal them up. No, you actually want them to die, because in this position, what you actually, the lose condition that's available on the table is that you can't get enough resources into the center lane, and your opponent somehow is able to counterattack, given the fact that your opponent's hero, like the center tower there, is just at 8, as you saw very quickly. So You just need to get as many resources into that center lane as you can, and the easiest way to do that is to have your stuff die. And the reason why I'm saying specifically that buying the healing salve is wrong, like he doesn't use it here, which is correct, but buying it is wrong is because it blocks you from possibly buying a town portal in the future. And I know that seems like a little bit of a bank shot and a little bit of a nitpick, but here's my reasoning why. Like you have this game almost locked up. It's just going to be so hard for your opponent to counter attack in that center lane given the game state that's going on here. The only way is when your opponent somehow manages to commit enough resources there, and in that case, you would rather have access to extra gold in case you didn't pick up any this time so that you can buy a town portal scroll if it shows up in the next round. I know that this is a bit of a weird bang shot kind of idea, a bit of a long shot, but I think that this is actually like how you have to think in these positions. This is a mentality that very much comes from Magic the Gathering. I think is that when you are in positions where you have almost won the game, is you have to identify lose conditions for yourself. So, I mean, alternatively, when you're far behind, you have to identify win conditions of like, how can I win the game given this with crazy weird series of events? My opponent doesn't draw anything good. This is the series of plays that they make that are mistakes. Like, you have to be able to think that way. And when you're on the winning side, you have to think of a lose condition. So the idea of like what is the worst case scenario? How could I possibly lose this game? And in that case, I think that buying that healing salve is wrong because it doesn't do anything. You shouldn't be using it on your units anyway. Like, I mean, you're not going to be using it on a Tidehunter. You don't have any heroes in the rightmost lane. And the two heroes in that left lane, you actually want to die so that you can reposition them into the center lane, or you want to transport them out and reposition them into the center lane. Specifically, actually, because it's a Thunder God's Wrath deck that you're playing against, having the low health heroes in that first lane is actually good because it means that they'll die, be able to redeploy faster, which is a good thing for you. Obviously, this is a nitpick, though. It's just one that I kind of noticed when I was watching the game that I thought was particularly interesting and kind of, fed into this theme about macro that I thought was interesting. So that'll do it for today. Thank you very much for joining me. It was a lot of fun. As always, I learned a lot through doing this. I really do learn a lot through doing these and analyzing the games and thinking about them carefully, about like how all the different pieces lock together. And I hope that I've been helping you guys learn too and getting excited for the game. Please send me feedback. I really do want feedback. I want just lots more feedback about things that I'm doing well, things that I'm not doing well. This is my macro and my micro, about execution in my speaking versus the planning and the structure of the tutorials, quote unquote. But that'll do it for today. As I said, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to check out Inks Gaming if you haven't had a chance yet. Take care, everybody.